Hello, Underdog Leadership Podcast listeners. Jenny Mitchell here with another amazing author, amazing woman, and amazing conversation. My guest today is Mojdeh Cox, and I just love her title, so I'm going to actually share it. She is the founder, CEO of Cox Co, and she calls herself an organizational development consultant. What a great name, Mojdeh.
Thank you. It's what I do day in and day out. So it doesn't sound so exciting to me, but I'm glad it has you going.
Well, and I have learned a lot from Mojdeh through this process. And she's going to talk a lot more about her work in anti-racism and organizational development and organizational change. She's got a pretty powerful story in the book. I will start there, Mojdeh. I'm curious to see. Tell me about when I reached out to you. Tell me about when I called you and said, I've got this idea. And tell us where you were in your world, too. Let's set that up.
Jenny, can you remind me what month you called me?
Yeah, I wonder.
I feel like it was like fall. I feel like it was September.
So I'm thinking March we were in Toronto. So let's call it like Christmas or maybe even January, because it was a short timeline. I remember thinking to myself, oh my gosh, these women, I'm so excited about this. I hope they enjoy, experience my enthusiasm, because it's a quick turnaround. And you said something, I remember you saying, because we didn't know each other. Let's clarify for our listeners. Yeah. So what was that first call like? Tell me more.
Well, Jenny, it's actually kind of funny because I think I told you that I recalled somehow I landed on one of your mailing lists. Yeah. And I think we were trying to connect. Yeah. Over the previous, year and some, and I was always really pulled by your e-blasts because I understood that there were e-blasts, but I was like, my goodness, this woman is great at communicating, because I feel like she's talking directly to me. It wasn't one of those that I would normally just, place in a file folder to review later, or, to be frank, delete, depending on what ends up in my inbox. So I was fascinated by you because of that experience, because I remember in my workplace, in my previous life, I was receiving communications from you, and I thought, my goodness, she's a compelling communicator, because no one has ever spoken to me like that through an e-blast. And so I thought, like, you should be giving some tutorials to some folks. And so that was the first thing. And I thought, what great to meet with you. And of course, it validated for me that you're a people person about relationships. And so we clicked right away. But at that time, I want to say, less than 6 months out from living the story that I actually am telling. So I know that all of the women in this collaboration have unique stories with different timelines. Yeah. Some are dating way back, and some are pretty fresh. And I'm in that bunch. So I couldn't wrap my head around, is this the time? It was
Is this the time? Is that what you were going to say?
Is this the time for me to do this? And I remember you telling me that the time and the energy and the effort around this project would be an investment in myself. And I took that away, and I said, okay, Jenny, give me a couple of days. It was actually, now I do remember, it was a couple of nights. I said, give me a little bit of time to sleep on it, and then we'll take it from there. And that phrase, an investment in yourself. And I thought, my goodness, I've neglected myself, I think, for, 40 some odd years.
Yeah.
I think it's a good time to start to invest in myself. And so that's what had me hooked on the experience of collaborating in this way, and hoping that it would contribute to me finding my way through this journey of whatever healing may look like. And so it became a part of that journey of healing for me. So pretty special.
You used that word healing very intentionally too when we spoke. You talked about it on the weekend. So just for our listeners, because we're diving in, Mojdeh and I, if this is your first episode, do go back and listen to episode 1 about beginnings and how this all came about. We're talking about a collaborative book that we as 12 women CEOs wrote together. Mojdeh is talking about her particular chapter that she wrote. And it's funny because, that expression, it's never a great time, or it's always a great time. It kind of depends on how you think about it. But you're right. You were bang smack in the middle of it. Smack.
Oh, right? Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. I was still having days where I was, even though I had at this point moved on to the next chapter of my life and was starting to build up my business, and securing clients for the first quarter of the year. So it was such a weird time for me because here I was functioning as I normally would. In fact, probably better because I didn't have external stressors and I had this newfound freedom and control and could do everything in a way that was values aligned and felt good. That was happening at the same time as sheer like devastation. And there were still days that I write about this where I would turn to my spouse and say, did that really happen to me?
Yeah.
And I still couldn't wrap my mind around what I had just experienced.
Yeah. 100%. And so it was quite a leap of faith. I just want to honor you here to, to come and join me. So we didn't know each other. You didn't know the other 11 women, but I'm reading your bio here and we're not doing bios on these podcasts. You can go through the bottom and have a look at her details and all that stuff. But I did laugh when I looked at, where's the part here that you and I were kind of meant to be together, because she talks about being a co-visioning, co-designing. This word collaboration is really deeply rooted in who you are, isn't it, Mojdeh?
I come from a collectivist culture. And so I think that's, when we're looking at why do we want to diversify any project, any team in perspectives is because of things like this. So here you are coming very relational yourself, coming from a completely different world.
Totally.
And we've crossed paths and we're able to click. So some of this comes naturally to me because the culture that I stem from, though I've been socialized here in Canada, I'm rooted in relationships. This is what my folks are about. This is this is where I come from.
Yeah.
And to be an immigrant in a place like this where it's hard to carve out space to feel like you belong, you have to hold on to some real truths that carry you through your life that are tied to your ancestry and where you come from. And that's what keeps me going. Like if you were to say what inspires you to maintain relationally in all of your work, it's to honor my culture, and it's what I know.
Wow. So you speak so proudly about where you came from. And for those of you listening, keep an eye on Mojdeh Cox. She's going lots of places, and I can't wait to find out more. So let's set this up. Question number one, what did you think your story was about, and what did it actually end up being about?
Wild. I thought my story was going to be about the harm aligned with the experience, because that's the dark, juicy, glorified, dramatized bit of the story. That's the hook. And what I explain it as, or describe it as the walkout in my story. Yet as soon as I put pen to paper, and that's how we got started, was actual pen to paper. And I so appreciated that. I know some of us went right behind our electronics, but I'm from that generation where I was still writing my bachelor essays on paper. So it comes naturally to me. And I thought, okay, pen to paper, and the story quickly turned into a journey of that word that you point out, healing, and what processes I went through to unpack my experience. But then also I had a lot of responsibility, and still do, on my hands, where I have a big family. So I had to think about life priorities at the same time. And so that the story became about healing and recovery, which was fascinating to me. It was not what I expected.
Yeah. And I know you had a lot of apprehension, about how to tell a story authentically, to keep it honoring, your former employer. For those of you listening, Mojdeh was walked out unceremoniously, without cause, it was a shocker. And that's not what the story is about. That's what I really want listeners to know. You're right. Yeah. It's about where you went from there.
Honestly, the title, I thought, sorry to interrupt. If I don't tell you this, I'll forget. Yeah. I was, because this is how I cope. So I'm going to learn a lot about me. I joke around a lot in my own mind about my own situation sometimes. And when I have the energy, this is how I get through the day. I honestly thought it was going to be called "You Can't Make This Up." Because because it's what keeps running through my head over the last year. You really can't make this up. And then I realized, but sure, it's a juicy story, I guess, for folks, but that's not what our intention was with the book. We really wanted to speak to the women who were in real time, just like I was in my healing journey in real time, to pull from our experiences and get that extra skip in their step and boost their confidence and know that they're not alone. And these experiences are, unfortunately, but also fortunately, too frequent to tell a story every time it happens. So I feel really privileged because I think our stories aren't really unique at all, as much as we want to dramatize them. Like, you really can't make this stuff up, but it happens too often.
Yeah.
And so that's when I shifted gears, and it was validating for me because I realized, yes, our initial intention and who we wanted to speak to were women just like us.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And that's where the marriage of the research and the stories is so cool in this book, because the research tells you it's the data, but then the stories illuminate it. And that's what I just think is such a beautiful thing about this book. So speaking of books, we're going to have you read an excerpt from it. And of course you picked I just love the excerpt you picked. A high level synopsis, just to situate our listeners on the podcast in this little excerpt you're going to share.
So at this point, I had already described the walkout, and that in itself is short-lived because in reality, it was actually very, you can't make it up fast. I at one point described being at the curb outside of the property that the organization owned. And so that's I don't know how else to. I'm still see when I think back at that, this is the visceral reaction that I have. Anyway, high level overview of the synopsis is, this is me sort of unpacking at the curb after I had already described what that walkout was like. And you kind of get to hear what my running thoughts were.
Let's hear it.
Okay, let me pull this up, Jenny. Okay. Traditional leadership paradigms reference failure as something to be avoided rather than be embraced or expected. Similarly, success is framed around being perfect. The reality is that the journey between victories is anything but linear. There are successes and failures, and the steps are rarely linear. The leadership journey has its own organic sequence. I now believe that failing is an important step towards great leadership. Failing forces leaders to be humble. Humility enables leaders to make more informed decisions, inspire others, and drive meaningful and sustainable change. Failure also helps leaders evolve and learn critical lessons, like how to listen to others. The old leadership paradigms aligned failure with demonstrating weakness. Embracing failure as a natural part of the leadership journey requires emotional maturity and courage. This is called failing forward. I was intentionally reframing failure as a valuable and necessary part of my journey and growth. I decided I would emerge on the other side of this experience with a bolder version of myself.
Failing forward, look at you.
And I can't tell if it makes me angry or it inspires me, but both things are existing right now. If you were to say, this is the face of both rage and motivation. So it's, even reading that still, it still pulls me. So I hope it lands with others what I'm actually trying to say.
Well, and we just before the podcast started, we had this interesting observation that they're tough lessons to learn, right? Like, we all learn them in our own time, right? Your journey, my journey, whatever. But there is a silver lining. When you take the time, like we did, or like our listeners, I hope they will take, to process, to ask yourself, what was it about that relationship or that experience that I'm to bring forward into my next life? And how can I reframe the experience? Because, it's easy to say I failed. I mean, it's not easy to say it, but like externally I failed, right? That's the external part. But then to bring it internal and ask yourself, and not or, and what did I learn? Like, how can that expression of being just a little bit better than the day before? That's what I
Yes.
think this is about.
Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure. Because I think I do recall naming, I don't want to go back to this healing
person that you
and
were.
Absolutely. This journey of healing and re-emerging is not going to look like I don't want to go back to the person I was before. Not that there was anything wrong with her, but I think I had explained what I had to sort of put back into perspective for myself and really honor who I am. And for me, it's about no more sacrifices if it's not for the greater good. For me, there's no more that's a non-negotiable. My values are non-negotiable. Mm-hmm. Integrity is non-negotiable for me at this point. And that's the power of being an entrepreneur, actually. Yes. So I'm very clear and yet kind with folks that I collaborate with. And I think folks are aligning with me because they're about the same thing. They get it. Yeah. And so it's failing forward it's been quite the blessing for me because I've actually been propelled into a newfound freedom that I in no way could have had in my previous situations and scenarios.
Yeah. You also speak in your story about embodied roles. That's an expression that Megan Rabine's research uses, which is where you almost over-identify with the constituent group that you're working with. And you talk a lot about, actually, you don't talk about your lack of boundaries. You talk about how you found your new boundaries in entrepreneurship, which is kind of an oxymoron. Like, right, people think of entrepreneurs as like, kind of workaholics working all the time. But for you, that was actually freedom, like you described. If you were to go back and peek, whisper in your former self's ear about some of those patterns or habits you were modeling, because I'm going to guess you were working late hours. Like, this is for those of our listeners in the podcast that are working crazy hours, not taking care of themselves, don't like the word self-care, but let's just put it in there, depleting their energy. Like, what would you say to them, Mojdeh?
I honestly think that it's a journey that you have to experience to truly get and for it to be sustainable. So I would actually allow now, the new me would say, let her make those mistakes. Yeah. I know it's a harsh reality. Yeah. I can't bubble wrap myself either so that I can be unharmed because I will not learn. For one thing, I would not have the level of empathy and emotional maturity if I didn't get all those bumps, bruises, scrapes, and live through what I did. It's unhealthy. A lot of people drive themselves to areas of their lives and in corners of the world that it's very difficult to turn back from. And so I would of course try to intervene and not let myself get to that level. I wasn't there. But, we started having this conversation before we got to the episode. When Jenny and I are in the same space, you can't
stop talking. Yes.
I think I'm the problem, but it's okay. All that to say is that we talked about those unrealistic expectations and about perfectionism. To strive for excellence is a great thing. No one's talking about not striving for excellence. Mm-hmm. Setting unrealistic expectations and doing it at the expense and at the you're really paying for it in the way of your health, wellness, and the things that should matter most in your life, like your life outside of work. For me, it was that separation of what I do for a living and who I am as a human being. I talk about balance. I've written about balance before in the home. So I've been working on balance my whole life. Just not in this way. I didn't think that I needed to negotiate these terms with myself
Yeah.
I thought I had to negotiate externally. So yes, you talk to your employer about boundaries. Like I'm coaching people through this right now, or
Yeah.
you set certain boundaries with people in your lives. But we don't talk a lot about the kind of negotiations that must go on with yourself so that you're not bartering things like your livelihood, your, zest for life,
Self-worth,
your
self-worth.
self-worth, your care for yourself, the empathy you have for yourself, and the respect that you have for yourself, so that you can say, no, I need X, Y, and Z to be able to do this during the day. For this organization to grow or for this business to evolve, I need to take care of this. And I think that's such a deep part of leadership. We talk about the inner work. We're not talking about inner work and learning how to meditate and,
Yeah.
taking time out before responding. Those things are important. Don't get me wrong.
Yep.
Taking walks in the woods, clearing yourself and your mind, clearing your palate with nature. All of those things are important. That's not the inner work that leadership requires first and foremost.
Yeah.
It's the capability to negotiate the terms that are sustainable with yourself, that are integral to the work that you do, elevate your integrity, or give you some if you're void of that right now. There's phases in people's careers. And I think that it's really important to not leave out that a part of the leadership, the hard work, that inner work, isn't about going out into the woods and meditating. What it's about is learning how to negotiate the terms that's going to make you a better version of yourself with yourself. That's hard.
Mic drop. Okay, here's what I'm thinking about. I just want to share this thought. I have a wonderful colleague in my world who runs a social services organization, because just shout out to those underdog professions, right? Social services being one of them. And I had a great breakfast with her, and we talked a lot about what it was like to lead those kinds of compassionate, empathetic people who constantly broke their own boundaries. Just as a general rule, these kinds of people that are brought to these professions. And it was really interesting because she said her leadership approach is mostly focused on how she shows up. In other words, her job is to be, I don't know if the word vessel is the right word, or a place or a space to listen. Like I just see her and you align so much in this: listen, engage, be thoughtful, not react. Like, to just not react. Let's just start with that. That is, you have to be ready for that, Mojdeh. You have to have done the work. You have to be prepared. You have to, for me, it would be, I need to do my exercise in the morning, all my things that I need to do to be 100% present in that day. And I thought that was such a great message. We think of leadership as being in books. We think of leadership, I don't know what we think of leadership as, the person in charge. It's really more about how you show up, right? Than anything else. And you make that choice. And that's what I hear in your story, that choice.
Thank you. It's a false narrative to say that those in the social impact or community work have to be burnt out, have to drive themselves to the point where, yes, the demand is there, but we cannot burn ourselves out. And so, how we show up and centering that is really important, because you're compelled to check in with yourself. Am I okay? There's a great responsibility. I was working with people who were on the, and supporting organizations who were under-resourced and on the front lines of work during a global crisis. That's no joke. People are tired. And so we can't all be tired, because then who are we helping in our tired state? So I think that, I really am aligned with this friend of yours or colleague of yours, because it is really important to consider how we show up. It ultimately impacts other people. If we
100%.
care about others, we have to care about ourselves.
Hello. If we care about others, we have to care about ourselves. And that language of self-compassion, I'm seeing more of that. I'm a big fan of Kristen Neff's work. If you're listening and you're looking for a good resource book, it's really helped me, that idea of loving yourself. There's so many parts about this. Okay, back to focus, Jenny. Back on the program. But I think we could really, I hope for our listeners, you're hearing that it's okay to take care of yourself and put your needs on the list, right? That's what I want to take away. And I know you're a big champion that. I just wanted to get that across. Okay. Was there a moment in the process, Mojdeh, during the writing that something clicked or something became clearer? I'd love for our listeners to hear about that.
You know, we spoke, thanks for asking this question, because we spoke earlier about the responsibilities that come with leadership. Yeah. Yes, we have the responsibility of you know, the organizational needs, and then the people within orgs, and then the communities that the organizations are in. I think particularly at the community level leadership circles, it compels folks to share their learning. I think our leadership responsibility is to share in our learning. You know, looking across at who's doing this work with you, as opposed to looking up or looking down to see how far you've come up the whatever ladder that you're comparing yourself to others, or whatever you're striving for. Not to look back and say, okay, that's where I've been. That's great. Okay. Yeah, I know my steps in my journey. You have to share those lessons with those who are shoulder to shoulder with you right now in community. Can't leave those folks behind. And I think that's one of the mistakes that we make in leadership, is that we don't think that other colleagues that are lateral colleagues need to also have some motivation and inspiration from one another. And I think we have that responsibility to share in our learning. I think this sort of culture of competition prohibits that. And that's when you have to kind of try to peel away at the layers of our ego and get down to the humility piece, because that's what's going to help us share the most. So for me, to answer your questions, you know, so many are given lemons over and over and over again. You know, we've heard this analogy. And if someone were to whisper in their ear the recipe for lemon meringue pie instead of just lemonade, is that not a bonus for everyone? You know, we'll have some people who are capable of only the lemonade when they're given lemons. That's okay. There's space for that. But ain't that a scrumptious little, snack to have your lemonade mixed in with the lemon meringue pie? Because that's what I think I did. Like I didn't just take some bruised lemons and make some lemonade. What I feel I have now is lemon meringue pie. I love pie. It's delicious. I like it more than lemonade, I'll tell you that. So what I'm saying is that, for me, I was sort of thinking along the line of my journey. And I thought about the responsibility of sharing my learning, also sharing my failure, and sharing the most humiliating moment of my career. Because number one, that makes people feel a lot less alone. That's what I needed at that time. I needed someone to tap me and be like, hey, Mojdeh, I remember a time this happened to me. Here's where I am now. This is what I did. And so although I had some wonderful, community members who supported me from the minute they understood what went down, and the majority of community was on the side of understanding that this should not have happened in the way that it did, it was important for me to share. I thought this was the opportunity to do that, share in the journey. And that's what I think took the turn of, it's not about the harm. No. Because that's a good story, but you can Google that and get a lot of those stories. What I think that we're missing is sometimes that lesson, those lessons along the way, not to necessarily change the trajectory, because I already told you, I wouldn't whisper in my own ear 5 years ago, because I don't think I would have taken the plunge into accidental entrepreneurship, now living more financially stable than I ever had, even before taking a pay cut to go into the community sector, because that was a sacrifice I had to make. And I now come home to my family, or I work right here where I am in my cozy little house. So, there's so many things that I cherish now that it wouldn't have been possible. And I think for me, that spark at that point of writing, it was like, no. You need to tell people how you turned those bruised lemons, not just into lemonade. You could have done that. but you turned it into lemon meringue pie, and now you're willing to slice up the pie, let everyone have a little taste of it so that they too will want to work on their own recipe. That's what I want.
And that collaboration, that sharing, when you share, you also hold space, you listen. That was very present with all of these women. And I'm just going to challenge all of us listening to this podcast. We're pretty good as leaders doing, right? We all know how to do. But to share, I know how many pressures there are in our lives, to get things done, to take that time. And I'm guilty on this one too. So I don't want you to think I'm hanging out in the ivory tower here, but to really engage and listen and find a peer group. I mean, that's everything about Chavender is about peer, right? Community building. I think we learn so much in group communities. We realize that we're not alone. We realize that our stories are more similar than different, which was a huge aha for me, I have to say, during this book. That was a big one for me. Yeah. We sat around the table, or in our case, we went out for dinner and had a wonderful meal. And it was like we knew each other because our trajectories, though different, had similar elements to them. And so that inner circle of understanding leadership was very present. I'm not going to ask you about collaboration because I just think you ooze it from all of your pores. And I imagine your approach with strategic planning, for example, Mojdeh, I know that's one of your wheelhouses. Just as a curiosity thing for Jenny Mitchell, how do you do strategic planning with a collaborative and based on your experiences lens? Tell us what it would be different about it.
Oh, you break the mold of just talking to leadership. Right. Really focus. I center the stakeholders, and if I may say so, the underdog stakeholders.
Yeah, the people that are experiencing, right?
Absolutely, because listen, from my lived experience, I have worked in different roles, different levels of the organization, and almost other than the last experience I had with my former employer, my most immediate employer, I had been at different entry points in an organization. And I recall, that's the important part in leadership, is not to forget what others this is empathy. This is perspective taking. This is visionary leadership. Because if you don't take the lens of the folks that are not necessarily heard.
Living it.
Yes,
yeah.
Not heard every day, but are executing on the organization's mission. Those are the people that deserve to be heard more than anything else. Of course, I take my direction and I work deeply with leadership, but I make that very clear. Anything that I collaborate, organizational audits, I talk to, more than anything else, I'm spending a good phase of my project time with stakeholders that are not often heard. And they tell the most compelling stories about where an organization needs to go. And most times the things that stick the most come from, folks at the entry level of an organization executing on the work. And I think I come with that lens because I spent a decade and a half in organized labor. And I see that, those who control the means of production, it's a huge risk not to listen to them and bring them along the journey. Those are the people that are making everything go around. So I respect working people. I respect workers at all levels. And I think it has done me really well, actually, in my business, because the approach is one that gives everyone an opportunity, as many people as possible, an opportunity to be invested in an organization's strategic vision. It's win-win-win for everyone if you take this approach.
Yeah, from the ground up. What's the biggest takeaway from this whole experience?
The concept of connecting failure to the journey, if you want your journey to be colorful and nuanced, is something that I think was eye-opening as something that I experienced throughout the writing. I found it to be really difficult to accept, because that meant that I now had to take some responsibility,
Mhm.
right? Like that.
Mhm.
It's not a great feeling when you know you did not deserve what happened to you.
Right.
Like, this is a unique situation. I think in leadership, you have to take ownership over your part in almost everything that you do, because you are, in fact, responsible for everything in this said project. But for me, it was that, okay, own up to what you could have done differently. For me, it was like, okay, trust in your instinct when you see red flags. Who were you not listening to? Why were you surprised? Those things I started to question. So for the biggest takeaway for me was that, there is a deep connection. Almost every woman told a story about how they fell somehow, whether they describe it as failure or not. I think we should be okay to say this F word.
That's F word.
It's one F word I'm putting on rotation now in my vocabulary, because I think the more comfortable we become with the word, then the more authentic we can be, and quite frankly, better leaders. I have not learned anything from someone who had said my journey has been, and I'm not the kind of person like you can give me something I've memorized from beginning to end, and I'll try to find something new. I'll pull something that I at least I can think of, something new that I can take away.
Yeah.
It's hard to learn from people who paint this flowery journey of excellence and perfection. Yeah. No one actually really believes that, though. Like, tell me, where's the lie? No one really believes that journey is absolutely, porcelain perfect. Yeah, absolutely not.
I'm thinking about the underdog leadership title here, even just the title of this whole podcast. This whole thing was about telling these stories in real time. It was about reframing failure. It was about letting go of the expectation of perfection. I often will say, Mojdeh, your expectation and your reality make your own disappointment. Yes. Right? So it's like we actually have a lot more control about this, and where this conversation to me is landing, and which is such a cornerstone of my executive coaching. It's a cornerstone of how you've been able to walk through this process, this journey, this healing, is we always have choice. Okay. We always have more choice than we think. Anxiety, I've spoken publicly about my challenge with anxiety, which is just part of who I am. That comes when we think we don't have choices. And that is a story we tell ourselves. There are always choices. The problem is that some of the choices are really freaking hard. And I think normalizing those choices, I'm sorry, I can't come to XYZ event because I'm just not feeling great, or, this is a tough time for me, or just normalizing that what we need is okay to voice out loud, that doesn't make us terrible people. And that's my dog in the background. Sorry for that. He's waking up. But I just love where we've landed with this conversation about choice, because for anybody who's listening, your story, Mojdeh, is inspiring, but I don't mean and if Mojdeh can do it, you can do it too.
You can do it too. Absolutely. Absolutely. If I could do it in the state that I answered your phone call in December, Jenny, where I had at that point made a decision. Yes, you're going to branch out into entrepreneurship. I had a couple of clients on the go already. Yeah. I was carving out my work for the first quarter of 2023, yet in utter, very fragile. Like, I could do my work. It was so different. Like, when it came to work mode, very, very, I was on my A game, quite frankly, like never before. Mm-hmm. And I remember that conversation, and I was such a different person. Such a different person.
So, where can people get in touch with you? How do you like to be communicated with?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, as well as find us online, mojdehcoxco.com. That's the website for Cox Co. I work with my first love, my son. My oldest is awesome. This is a family-run boutique consulting firm. So, I'm not too active on social media platforms as I lick my wounds and get myself back into shape. But I'm gearing up for that as well, just setting realistic expectations for myself. So, but I will respond on LinkedIn Instagram. Anyone wants to reach out online through the website as well is invited to do so.
Amazing. And I'm just going to spell your name, Mojdeh Cox, C-O-X. Thank you so much for that. And for those of you listening that want to buy this book, this incredible marriage of research and lived experience stories, it now has a title. And we're calling it Embracing Ambition. And it's about reclaiming these stories. It's about sharing these stories. It's about looking at the research and saying, okay, so based on this, how will we proceed in the world? And really the thesis, I guess, of the book is we can do a better job of preparing women for leadership. And that's what the book is about. If you'd like to access your copy, if you're listening to this podcast, there will be some information in the show notes. You can also always reach out to me, Jenny at chavender.com. Chavender is spelled just like lavender, but with a CH at the beginning. That makes the spelling easy. And Mojdeh, thank you so much for, of course, I knew we'd have a great conversation, but I'm particularly struck today by your sincerity and your honesty about your journey. That I find that really inspiring.
Thank you, Jenny. You make it easy. Imagine if you did it through an e-blast, if you got me on some FaceTime one-on-one, you're going to get me talking pretty genuinely. So thank you for creating this space. Appreciate
Awesome. Awesome. Well, listen, everybody, have a great day wherever you are. Let us know what you think. Please don't forget to subscribe. If you enjoyed this, there's more to come. If you feel like it, leave us a review. Those mean a lot to us. It helps us get our message out, which is the whole goal here. So without further ado, Mojdeh, bye-bye. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll see you next time. Wow. Oh my God.
That was fun.
I wish we lived closer.